Okay, so welcome to this webinar on childcare and protection records in the 19th and early 20th century. So this webinar, we're really focusing on records in the State Archives collection, and then we'll just look at some other sources around that can assist you with your research. So the first question is why? Why do you want to research the orphan school records and the related records about children who were in care in this time period? Well, the records about these children who were admitted to various government-run institutions do provide a fabulous insight into aspects of our colonial past, which can be ignored because they're just about children. But children grow up to be adults, right? And they do shape our futures and they shape our society once they grow up. And then also too, you can't and we shouldn't overlook children, and often kids have been forgotten and overlooked. And the other thing to remember too is that the records themselves are more well known, where they are is well known, a lot of things have been indexed, so they are actually easier to research as well. So all of those things together help. And just bear in mind too that while they used the term orphans quite widely in the 19th century, it might be the case that even both of the child's parents were actually still living, but just not in a position to take care of those children. So why would kids be taken into government care? And I guess it's a lot like now, but think of the context of the time. So you might have people who were convicts and there might be issues surrounding their convict status that meant they couldn't take care of their children themselves. So, for instance, children accompanying their mothers to the female factory, there were limits on the age. I think you couldn't be older than about 4 or 5 or 6, after which stage you had to be taken away from the female factory and entered into one of the orphan schools. The female convict might have been someone who was assigned to a master who wouldn't support those children. So she may not have had a choice but to put her child in care. And two, she may have committed an offence here or been under some kind of punishment that meant that they wouldn't allow her to take care of her own children. Death, of course, of one or both parents, so particularly in the situation in a family where the major breadwinner passes away, the other partner may not have a choice but to hand her children over for their survival because there may not have been enough money or resources to take care of the kids. Sickness of one or both parents could be a serious factor as well. And we do know throughout the 19th century that lots of people were admitted, say, into mental hospitals, and that meant, of course, that they couldn't take care of their children. Again, you might find that both parents or just one parent was admitted to jail, and of course, children couldn't accompany their parents there. The kids themselves may have committed offences and so may have been put into some kind of institution as a repercussion of that offence, and families just falling on hard times and unable to take care of the family, and it gets split up and sent in all different directions. So many, many reasons why the government might need to step in or take children into care. Now, the first thing that's really important when you're researching records relating to children in care is that Family and Community Services controls most of our children in care records held in the State Archives collection. And essentially, there's 2 access directions that we need to keep in mind. The first is that any case files are closed to general public access for 100 years. So while we do have adoption files, we do have some ward files from public community services in the collection, those are closed to general public access for 100 years. And registers to case files, so what we're thinking about there are books which might have one-line entries about children. They're closed to general public access for 80 years. So in that situation where someone might be interested in a record that's less than 100 years old, the idea is that you contact the Department of Communities and Justice, which is the Cluster Agency for Family and Community Services, and you can request permission to have access to a particular file of a particular individual. There is a process that you need to follow through, and I think you need to prove what your relationship to that person is, and they will consider that request, and if it's granted, then they will give you access to that file. So that's all done through Family and Community Services. We don't provide that access here, even though we house some of those files here. So for that reason, particularly today, we're looking at 19th century records and those early 20th century records that are actually open to public access. And then just on the bottom line there, you'll see the web link for the Family and Community Services website for information for individuals who want to access their own records or who might be seeking to access records of others. So like a parent or a sibling or a grandparent or something. So they do provide information there about how to go about the process, but certainly you need to follow that process to request access to those records through the department, not through state archives. So I hope that's clear. And two, if you're looking for a record relating to adoption or fostering in the current time period, so if you're looking for an existing adoption or a recently passed adoption, you must contact Family and Community Services as well. They have an area called an Adoption Information Unit. I've put the phone number, both phone numbers up there on the talk, as well as their email address and their website. So if you're looking about an existing or a past adoption, and by past adoption we mean recent, but I guess up to 100 years ago, contact Family and Community Services to follow that inquiry through. Now, so this is just to show you some of the information you can find on Family and Community Services website. I've found the page to do with looking for information about past adoptions, and you'll see there's quite a bit of information of things to consider, how to go about applying for adoptions in different time periods. So they've got a cutoff of 2010. So what you do if you're looking for something before 2010, what to do if you're looking for something after 2010. So that would be the place to start looking for information if you're after an adoption less than 100 years ago. And two, also on the Family and Community Services website, there is some information about how to access your care records if you lived in out-of-home care, which is what they refer to as foster care and those sorts of things, where you weren't in care with your own family, but you were in care elsewhere. So there is information there about how to apply for that information. So now we've sorted that out, we're going to think more about records in the New South Wales State Archives collection. And we always come back to dates a little bit, and I think that's because in the government sphere, the dates and when rules change affects what the records are like, and even if there are any records. And so the dates can be important. So we've got records of orphan schools from quite early, for example. So the female orphan schools start in 1801 and go to 1850. Male orphan school records, 1819 to 1850. Roman Catholic orphan school records, 1836 to 1886, and then the Protestant orphan school from 1850 to 1886. And then in the second part of the 19th century, you tend to see some of these other institutions develop, like Randwick Asylum, or the industrial schools and the nautical training ships. So think of the Vernon and the Sobraon, and we'll look at all these things through the talk. There's the Shaftesbury Reformatory, Parramatta Girls' Home, Biloela, all of those schools, which are actually, I think, just different iterations of the same institution. The Farm Home Boys for boys at Mittagong, which starts in the early 20th century. And this notion of boarding out, which we'll also talk a little bit about later, starts in the late part of the 19th century. But it's interesting to note that in New South Wales, formal adoption wasn't possible until the Child Welfare Act of 1923, which I didn't know. I just knew that adoption was more of a 20th century thing, but it's because of the Child Welfare Act of 1923 that we start to see adoption records. Now, some places to look on our website to locate records about missing children or children in care. So the first thing that we always suggest is collection search. So that's our catalogue on our website. And those of you who have been to a lot of the mini webinars would have heard us banging on about collection search quite a bit in the last few weeks. So on collection search, as well as lists of records in the collection and sometimes lists of items in the collection and sometimes even digital copies of some items in the collection, we also have put up detailed administrative history of government agencies. So you can find out when a particular government agency started, what kinds of things it did, when it changed its name, when it stopped operating, which department took over various functions from that agency, and so on. And that can be quite helpful just to work out which on earth agency it might be that you need to look for particular records of your interest. We've also got our Research A to Z, and the Research A to Z is just an A to Z list of research topics that we've written some things about over the years and how to find information on that topic. So inquests and deaths and births and government asylums and military and all sorts of different topics. And then today's topics, of course, there is a little guide on childcare and protection. We've done one on youth and child migration in the early parts of the 20th century, and we've also done the care leavers guide. And they're just aimed at different periods and different kinds of records relating to children in care, and where you can go to find out further information about that topic. We also have our online indexes, and this is where our volunteers and sometimes our staff have gone through particular records like a book or a file, and they've listed every name that might show up in that book to tell you what page to look at and some brief information that can help you to identify whether that entry would be helpful or not. So we have an index on our childcare and protection records where they've listed names showing up, and you might find some of our other online indexes are useful as well. And Ancestry. The Ancestry website can be another helpful resource for when you're researching children. So some of the orphan school records have been copied, and some of the Randwick Asylum for Destitute Children records have been copied, and the Vernon and Sobraon entrance books have also been copied onto Ancestry. Now, Ancestry is a subscriber website, we know that, but if you are a member of a public library, and if you're a member of the State Library of New South Wales, I believe while COVID has been raging, people can arrange for access at home, but I haven't heard, now that things are opening up, whether there's going to be some sort of reduction in that or whether they're going to keep that going. But if you can't do it at home, then certainly as things reopen, I imagine you'll be able to do that at your local library. And certainly we also have Ancestry available in our reading room here at Kingswood as well. So just when you're visiting the reading room at the moment, remember that you do need to make an appointment before you come in and have that appointment confirmed. And you can do that through our website. So now, looking at our website. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with this, the website, I've put the address down there in the bottom left-hand corner, records.nsw.gov.au. And at the moment, we've got the beautiful picture of the Sydney Harbour Bridge there. That's how you know it's our website. And then you can see over the Harbour Bridge, there's 3 boxes there, and the third one's called Quick Links. So if you click on Online Indexes or Research A to Z or Webinars or Jigsaw Puzzles, it will take you to that section of the website. So when you go to our website and if you click on Webinars, you'll go to our webinar library and you can see what's coming up, and you can then go in and view any past webinars as well. And then also too, you can search the online indexes and you can have a look at the research A to Z. So if you scrolled down on that homepage, you would then come across some boxes like this. And so these are just very popular links to very popular topics that tend to come up all the time for people. And you can see there that in the top row, in the very far right corner, we've got one called care leavers. So if you click on that box, what you'll see are a list of guides to do with childcare and protection. So there's the Care Leavers Guide, the Childcare and Protection Guide, and also a link to our Childcare and Protection Index. And so all of those resources are quite helpful for you. And then if you say clicked on the Care Leavers Guide, you'll come up with information about what to do if you're researching care leavers records and where to go and some useful resources there. At this point, I just want to mention the Find and Connect website. So this is such a useful tool. So this has been put together over probably 10 or 11 years, maybe even longer. And it's basically a database to different homes and orphanages and other institutions that looked after children. It gives you a history of that particular institution, and it tells you what records relating to inmates of that home or orphanage or institution survive and who to contact to get access to those. So it's really useful, particularly if you're looking for something that was run by a church or by another organisation. It's also useful if you knew where the home was, but you didn't exactly know what it was called. So there's a range of ways to get into things. So one of the things I've recently put up, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there, is a link to a map of children's homes. And I'll just click on that page now. And so what you can do is it's like an interactive map. You go into it and you can sort of see the streets and everything, and then you can see dots of different colours. And then if you click on the dots, you can actually go in and see what the home was on that particular location. So I've come up with the House of the Good Shepherd, in Pitt Street. And it gives you some details about when that home opened, when it closed, who ran it, and where it was. And then also sometimes a little picture, which is what you can see in the bottom corner there. And then you can view some more information about that. Also too, you can see, I've just gone back a page, on this homepage you can click on look for homes, look for photos, information about records. If I click on look for homes, what I'll come up with is this screen here. So you can type the name of the home or the suburb straight into that quick search there, or you can go in and browse a list of the homes by state. And you can do it alphabetically, you can do it by location, and you can also do that by date. So it's a really helpful resource. So if you do by A to Z, say, you'll come up with a list like this, and then you can just click on a particular home and find out more information about that. So if we pick the Mater Dei Orphanage at Narellan, you'd come up with a page like this, gives you a little summary about where that home was, who ran it, what it used to be called, what kinds of kids they looked after, and all of that sort of stuff. And then if I click on records, then it tells me what survived in terms of records, what kinds of records there are for kids who were there, and then who to contact to get access to those. So such a helpful website. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Now, going back to the State Archives website, round and round in circles here, we're going now to look at our Childcare and Protection Index. So from our homepage, I might just click on Online Indexes, Alphabetical List, C for Childcare and Protection. I'll find a screen like this. If I click on the Childcare and Protection Index title on the left-hand side there, then I will find a description about that index. And then if I click on the Search the Index button on the right-hand side, I'll be able to go straight to search that index there. So here I've just wanted to find out some information first about what's included in the index. And so what I find here is there's quite a few things. We've got the Mittagong Farm Home for Boys records, we've got Randwick Asylum records, we've got Orphan School records and Industrial School records. And if I then wanted to go and find out more about any of those series, I could click on the series number and I'd pop over to Collection Search, and Collection Search would tell me, say, what NRS 2438 was, what dates it was, what kinds of records were included. Or I could just click on the index and search for that particular record. So just hold that in the back of your mind for now. So now we're talking about the orphan schools in more detail. So we've got the Female Orphan School, which ran from 1801 to 1850, was set up by Governor King to house destitute young girls and initially located in George Street in Sydney. So they had, in 1801, 31 girls who were there. And then in 1818, the orphan school, they were moved to the new premises on the banks of the Parramatta River, out at Rydalmere there. And the George Street Sydney site became the male orphan school. So they put the boys in there in 1818, 1819. In 1825, the Aboriginal girls were transferred to the female orphan school at Parramatta from the native institution there. And then it was looked after between 1826 and 1833 by the trustees of the clergy of school and school lands. And then in 1850, the female school and the male school were amalgamated to form the Protestant orphan school. So it continues quite a way through the 19th century. So the male orphan school began in 1819 when Macquarie was disturbed, I guess, by the number of male orphans left in a state of poverty and nakedness. So he wants to establish a male orphan school for the relief, support and education of these unhappy and distressed children. And this was sited at George Street until 1823, and then because the premises were so dilapidated and the locality was so unsavoury, they moved them out to Cabramatta. So the boys are at Cabramatta, the girls are at Rydalmere Parramatta. Again, that school was looked after by the same agency, the trustees of the clergy and school land. The two schools, the male orphan school and the female orphan school, amalgamated to form the Protestant orphan school in 1850. So going back to our online index, we can search the name of an individual. So here we're searching for Bridget Buckley, and we find, when we search for a name, we come up with the institution that that child was in, what kind of record exists for them. If there's a date of committal, it tells us. It tells us what kind of record it is, if there's any more interesting detail. And then we also get details about how to look that reel up on a microfilm, and we can go from there. So Bridget Buckley, this one we're looking at this second record here to do with William Cox, Mrs. William Cox, sorry, who wants an apprentice. And here we have a letter from William Cox saying that Mrs. William Cox wants a female orphan to assist in nursing the children. She'd quite like it if Susan Anderson or Bridget Buckley could be sent to her from the female orphan school at Parramatta, and she'd prefer one of these girls as they've been recommended to her. And gee, I can feel for Mrs. Cox. Sometimes it'd be quite nice just to have a nice little girl to come and help you look after the kids. So I guess she was lucky in a way, and we do hope for Bridget that it worked out to be a good place for Bridget. We do also hold some indentures. There's one volume that covers 1822 to 1823, and these are formal agreements between the legal guardians of the apprentice and his or her prospective master or mistress. And so this is the indenture for Bridget Buckley, who was 13. So you've got a 13-year-old child coming to look after your children. So that's good. I've got a 14-year-old. Interesting. And then they say that they will teach Bridget the art, trade and mystery of being a servant, and she'll be taught in the best way and manner, and shall be allowed competent and sufficient meat, drink, apparel, washing, lodging, and all other things necessary and fit for an apprentice. So it's an agreement both ways. You'll be taught what we know and you'll learn a trade, and we will treat you well, and you will do your work well, and everyone will be benefited. Looking at the Ancestry website, I've just picked on the applications and admissions to orphan schools just to show you the particular a record that shows up in Ancestry. So a lot of people would be familiar with the search screen on Ancestry, and then you can go straight to that particular record. So in this instance, we've got a Mary Gregory up here in the applications and admissions to orphan schools, 1817 to 33. She's 6. She's admitted in 1817, discharged in 1820, to Mary Gregory, her mother, alias Underwood. And then her mother is married, so she's discharged to her mum, and hopefully things were better once she was back at home. The Roman Catholic Orphan School didn't start until 1836. It was government funded and it opened at Waverley House and again moved to Parramatta in 1844. Salaried lay staff ran the school until 1859 when the Sisters of the Order of the Good Shepherd took over the management, and the school closed in 1886. Now, the thing with the Roman Catholic Orphan School is that we hold very few records in our collection from this school. So there's some monthly returns for 1845, 1846. So returns would be where the institution, the matron or the superintendent would probably send in lists of all the children who were at that school, and they'd send those into the Colonial Secretary. And so quite a lot of institutions did have to send in returns on a monthly basis of who was there at that particular time. And then we've got some more returns from the Roman Catholic Orphan School at Parramatta between 1850 to 54. So there's not, unfortunately, one continuous sequence of records from the Roman Catholic Orphan School of the children who were there. So it's very gappy, and we tend to find when people come in to research it that we don't always have a lot of success, unfortunately. When we look at find and connect entries for the Roman Catholic Orphan School, they tell us that there are some records from 1877 to 1884 and to contact the Family Spirit Adoption Services. And then there's also some records from 1859 to 1886 at the Good Samaritan Archives, which would make sense because that's when the order took over the running of the school. And then there's some other records at the Family Spirit Adoption Services from 1888 to 1990 that might be relevant as well. So even then, that early time period is going to be quite problematic for anyone researching children in the Roman Catholic Orphan School. Okay, Protestant orphan school is a different matter. So the Protestant orphan school was formed when the boys' school and the girls' school were amalgamated in 1850 on the site of the female orphan school. This school was government funded. It was one of those that were inspected by the Royal Commission of Public Charities in 1873-74. And this was quite an important Royal Commission for those people who were in government care and the people that were running those institutions. So one of the things that came out of that Royal Commission, particularly for children, was this idea and belief that that barrack style of accommodation and care wasn't really in the children's best interests, and that children would benefit more from living in a family environment of approved foster homes or cottage style accommodation. So it's because of this Royal Commission that you start to see the foster care and the cottage accommodation come about, and that idea of the barrack style, you know, the traditional orphanage that you might see in the movies like in Annie, that starts to dissipate a bit, although it still continues for a while, as you'll see with the Randwick Orphan School records. So that's an important date for childcare and protection. So here we've got an entry from the Protestant Orphan School. This is for Charles Frederick Burton, who's about 3 in 1865. Sad story. Father's dead. His mother's an inmate of the Tarban Asylum, so she's at what became Gladesville Hospital. She's at Tarban Creek Asylum. It says in the comments there, the mother was sent from Darlinghurst Jail to Tarban. The child could not be received into the lunatic asylum and was too young to be sent to Randwick. So he was sent to the male orphan school and he died less than 2 years later in 1867 of measles and an abscess. Poor little baby. Poor baby. The Colonial Secretary's correspondence is another important avenue of research for people researching children in care. So, as for every single possible topic of people in the 19th century New South Wales, we always fall back to the Colonial Secretary's correspondence at some stage. So we've got the online index to the Colonial Secretary's papers, 1788 to 1825, which is really easy to search. And then we've got a later index, which is for the years 1826 to 1895. And that's been published on CD. It's available in our reading room, and some libraries and family history societies and historical societies have also bought a copy of that CD-ROM, and it's so useful because it's a name index and there are remarks to help you identify the person. So we'll have a look at some of those indexes now so that you can get a feel for what kind of information that even the index can tell you. So the 1788 to 1825 index is on our website. You can find that by clicking on online indexes, then going to C for Colonial Secretary, and under that you'll see Colonial Secretary 1788 to 1825. If you click on that, you'll see it's just an alphabetical index, mostly by surnames of people, but there are also some subject and institution headings as well. So here we've got Orphan Institution, male. And so these are more general records about the institution. And you can see here I've pointed to this one, children in Sydney recommended to be recommended for admission to. And then here you've got a reel number, a stroke number, and page numbers. So the stroke number, just for the purpose of looking on a reel, is like to find the section on a reel. Then once you found that section, then you go for the page number. And when you do that on the microfilm, and these microfilm are available in our reading room, also at many public libraries and at the State Library of New South Wales, many public libraries around New South Wales, and they're also copied onto Ancestry. So these can be viewed on Ancestry, and as I said before, many public libraries provide free access to Ancestry. A lot of them have been doing that free access to home while the pandemic has been on. And you can also look at Ancestry in our reading room, but the microfilms are another way to view these records also through the library or through our reading room. Okay, so the record with the arrow. Next page, when you look at that record here, we've got a list, as it said, of children proposed to be admitted to the male orphan school in Sydney. This is 1818, so this is just about the time that it's opening up. We've got names of children. We've got John Pounds there. The names of parents, McCarty and Pounds. The father's left the colony. It says here the mother's dead, and he's been living with the widow Shreves. Not a very good way, I'd say. Then, if we went back to that index and we looked up under John's name, so Pounds, John, if we went to the P's, we see that same letter again, and he's listed there by his own name, and it tells us again, son of Pounds and McCarty, in the care of widow Shreves, recommended for admission to the male orphan institution, which pretty much exactly what it was, right? So you can search that up either way, by his name or also by male orphan institution. Now, if we look at the later index, the Joan Rees index to Colonial Secretaries in letters received, 1826 to 1895. So this index mainly lists names that show in the Colonial Secretary's correspondence that is not copied. So these are letters that are in boxes at our office at Kingswood. Most of them haven't been microfilmed, so if people want to access them, they can either visit the reading room, need to make an appointment currently, or you can order copies of them. And as I said before, this index is on CD, and you can search it at possibly your public library, possibly your local family history or historical society, also in our reading room. And you can do it in a number of ways. So what I've chosen to do here is in the remarks column, I've put Vernon because I'm thinking about the Vernon and the Sobraon. And I just want to see what entries might show up under that remarks column. Click on search, and then what I get is a list of all the names where the Vernon shows up in the remarks column. So handy. I can see here I've got a letter number. So the 67 tells me that letter is from 1867, and it tells me 4849. So it's the 4,849th letter received by the office in that year. And then over here, this is the box number that I will find that letter in. And so I can see there's letters from 1867, 1874, 1885. I can even click on that column and sort by that column if I want to. So I can put everything in year order, and that might help me. I can have it in alphabetical order this way if that helps me. I might be looking for a child with a particular name, so I could just sort it by the first name if I wanted to do that. So it's quite a useful index. Now, this next page here, what we've searched for is orphan school. And so we've come up with a whole bunch of entries to do with orphan schools. So here is another place that you might come up with some Roman Catholic orphan school children. So don't forget the Colonial Secretary's correspondence, even in context of the Roman Catholic orphan school. It's not listing every child who was ever there, but certainly there are letters to do with children who were in that orphan school. So again, another reason to check the Colonial Secretary's index. Always, always recommended. And so then you've got your letter number with the year at the front, so 1836, 1872, 1843, and then the box number that that letter is shown in. So if you wanted to view that in the reading room, you want your letter number, you want your box number. If you're going to order copies of that for a fee, then you want your letter number and your box number, and really the name, yes please, and if you've got the remarks as well, all of that helps us when we're going to find them. Randwick Asylum. So Randwick Asylum, we have records of the asylum from 1852 to 1915. What we have is a register of inmates. So it's a series of books with entries going across the page of each child that was admitted to the asylum. We don't have any files or anything like that, unfortunately, for the kids who are there. It's just the books with the one-line entry, and that's it. And the background to the asylum is that it was opened in 1852 at Ormond House. It was opened by the Society for the Relief of Destitute Children. And this society was formed in response to a request by the Colonial Secretary, because the government could see the need for an institution to take care of children, but I guess they wanted it to be done privately, probably due to funding, because it's always a government thing, the funding, I mean. And the asylum aimed to provide care for abandoned children or for children whose parents were dissolute characters. Single parents could place their children in the asylum and pay for their maintenance. Children were usually between the ages of about 3 and about 10 and weren't eligible for admission into the orphan schools. And then they moved to Randwick in 1858. So 1852 started at Ormond House, moved to Randwick in 1858, and then in 1915 there were still children there, so barrack-style accommodation, and they were in 1915 sent to cottage-style institutions or boarded out. And then the site became a military hospital because 1915, it's World War I. They're starting to get some of those poor boys back from overseas, and I guess they needed somewhere for them to go. We don't have a lot of images and things for Randwick, unfortunately, but there is this lovely picture of the girls doing the washing. Thank goodness for my front loader at home. But anyway, the records of the inmates are included in our Childcare and Protection Index on our website. So if you put a name into that index and that child was in the asylum and the record is there, you should find that name. The thing to remember too is kids came here from everywhere. It just wasn't kids in the local area. And the third thing is that we've got microfilm copies of the register, but it's also available on Ancestry. So Ancestry has digitised our microfilm copy and it's up on Ancestry for viewing as well. So the index. So I've shamelessly used my own family history in this example. So my ancestors came from Ireland as a family. The father was an alcoholic. He was a policeman, but he was an alcoholic and he eventually got sacked for drinking. The mum, Elizabeth, she gave birth and then I think she had postnatal depression and they put her into Gladesville and she died there. And then the father ended up in Gladesville as well. And there were 4 boys, or 5 boys actually, because there was an older boy who was 13 at this stage. And the younger 4 were sent to Randwick Destitute Children's Asylum, and they aged from 12 down to 3. And this is a copy of the Randwick Asylum Register. So this is basically what you'll get when you look up the records for a child who was at Randwick. So we've got James, who's 8, Noble, who's 4.5, and William, who's 3. They're all Protestants. They tell you what happened to them when they were discharged. So all discharged, or these 2 discharged at the age of 13 in 1871 and 74. Tells you where they were apprenticed to in Bathurst and Orange. And the poor little one dies the year after he's admitted at the age of 3, and he was buried in the burial ground there. And we think that he probably died in the measles outbreak that occurred at that time because that was particularly deadly and a lot of the little ones passed away at that time. And so when you go to the site now, they've done some signage and things, and there's a memorial garden for the poor little children who were died. There's a list of all the children who died at the site on a commemorative wall, and they've been able to identify the remains of 35 children. And what you'll see here is a history of the asylum, the kinds of things that the children had to do, their daily duties. So the boys had to do the veggie gardens, milk the cows, raise the silkworms, make shoes, carpentry, some cooking and baking. And the girls made beds, cleaned rooms, did the laundry, did the needlework, and helped with the cooking. Talks a little bit about their meals, and then when the site was taken over by the Commonwealth as a military hospital. So 5,805 kids were admitted to care. And of course, the things that they died of were those horrible diseases of whooping cough and measles and other things. Gosh, we're so lucky now. We're so lucky. Another asylum that's quite interesting is the Sydney Benevolent Asylum. So these records are not New South Wales State Archives because the Benevolent Society was a privately run organisation. It wasn't a state government organisation. The State Library of New South Wales holds the Benevolent Asylum records. My understanding is that they're closed to public access and people have to make application to the society to get permission to have access, but the State Library could probably set you on the right direction as to whether that's the case for everything or just certain time periods. What I've got here is an index that's been published online to indexes and admissions to the asylum between 1857 and 1900, and then I've just put the website address down the bottom there. So it tells you how to search the index, what to do if you found an entry. It gives a bit of history of the asylum, what the records are, and there's some photos and things as well. And the point really is that you can go into the index, you can search for a name. So my little Hannahs are there. We've got James, John and Noble. They were all admitted in 1866 on the 17th of November and then discharged on the 21st of November. So obviously they've gone, and little William there as well, they've gone to the benevolent asylum for a very short time before they've been sent over to Randwick. And then we know that after Randwick, William didn't survive, but the older boys were all apprenticed out and went on to have long and good lives, in fact. So next we're going to talk a bit about the training schools and the industrial schools. So these were a thing after 1866, after the Act for the Relief of Destitute Children. This Act established the industrial schools, including on ships. And there was separate legislation for reformatory schools for children who had committed offences punishable at law. So we've got the Vernon from 1867 to 92, the Sobraon from 1892 to 1911, and then we've got the Newcastle Industrial School for girls that moved to Biloela in 1871. Then it went to Parramatta from 1887. We may know it more as the Girls Training Home Parramatta, which operated until 1975, or possibly even Kambala, which was 1975 to 1983. So that one ran for a long time in various places. So the Vernon and Sobraon, there's microfiche indexes to those that were compiled by the Genealogical Education Centre at Kiama, and we've got a copy of those fish here in the reading room, and you might find some of those at some of your family history centres around the traps as well. And more recently, the entrance books for both the Vernon and the Sobraon have been digitised on Ancestry for the whole period, 1867 to 1911. And we've got some great photos. That is one of our photos down the bottom there of the boys on board the ship doing shippy type military things. Sorry, that's not very technical language there. And here we've got them in the schoolroom. And don't they just look so neat and tidy and beautiful? They're just gorgeous. This next slide is a copy from the entrance book of the Sobraon, and this is for James William Smith. And it gives us quite a good picture of his background. So he's committed at the Burke Bench of Magistrates in 1897, tells us where he was born, what his religion was, couldn't read or write, it says, tells us he's got a bad character. And then it gives us some of his background too. So we've got details about his mother, Mary Macaulay, details not known, and he states that his brother was on the Sobraon, but he also had two sisters who were at Randwick. And then some issues with his behaviour and activities down the bottom there with the other big arrows. So he lives in the Burke district, visits Burke frequently, stays a month or two at a time, might sleep in an empty house or a shed, stays with common prostitutes, with Chinamen and Afghans sleeping in the same house, roams the street with other bad characters, and he had to go to the police court on the 30th of November 1893 for throwing stones in the street. Nice. And then the most amazing thing on the back is we've got the photo of this beautiful boy and a signature. So I sort of think that is his signature. So where on the first page it said he couldn't read or write, he must have been able to read or write to write his signature like that. In his word, he goes, I was sent here for being with bad company in Burke, was living at a place with the name of Mrs. Beeston. Father left my mother and she's living with another man named J. Macaulay. Was never up, I guess before the courts before. Never went to school before. Used to go out to the shearing sheds as a roustabout. Actually, that might be his handwriting on departure. I do beg your pardon. And he knows one boy, Sid Fenwick from Burke. And then it talks about his appearance as well. So his clothes are dirty and ragged. He's got no marks or scars. Seems intelligent, hard-working chap. Unfortunate, having had bad parents. Oh dear. Should turn out well with proper treatment. So there you go. And we got the signature working. So that's a good sign, right? And then here we've got an example from the Colonial Secretary's papers. So we can see here this is 1873, and that's borne out over there by the date. Received by the Colonial Secretary on the 4th of April. That's the letter number it was given on arrival in the office. So this is talking about two boys that were sent to the Vernon, and it's talking about their background. So the elder boys state that their father is a native of Hong Kong, the mother is English. Prior to their being sent here, by their own statement, they stole articles from a store at Tambaroora. They are all improving here very much. The two elder boys are working at carpentering and the younger at the general work of the ship. I think it would be a pity to allow them to go back to the goldfields among the Chinese diggers, who from their known mode of living would undo all the good that has been done, but it would be much better to apprentice the boys from this ship when eligible. So there's that notion of care for their well-being as well, which I think is really nice. It wasn't all awful, and they were out to try and do the right thing by the kids as best they could at the time. And there's an attachment to this letter as well. So this just talks about the children. It gives their names: Thomas Law King, William Law King, and then this is their offence, where they were convicted, and their sentence. So they were sent to industrial school at Vernon, and maybe it was the making of them. Who knows? Newcastle Reformatory starts 1869. They moved to Biloela, and then Shaftesbury sort of grew out of that as well. So at the beginning, it was the same sites as the industrial school for the female, firstly in Newcastle and then on Cockatoo Island. Then it ceased to be a reformatory at Newcastle, and the reformatory for females was proclaimed on Cockatoo Island. And then they moved from Cockatoo in 1880 over to Shaftesbury at Watson's Bay. The Parramatta Industrial School started in 1887 and then changed its name in 1912. So the land and buildings that had been used as the Roman Catholic Orphan School were set apart for the industrial school. There was an act in 1905 that changed the emphasis of the reformatory to concentrate on training and education as a means of developing acceptable behaviour. And after 1905 as well, they stopped sending girls younger than 8 to the industrial school. In 1912, the school was called a girls' training home, intended for girls of an uncontrollable character but not of immoral tendencies. Goodness me. So here we've got, again, the index on our website. So these records are included in this index. We've got Ruth Hammond, 15 years. There's a warrant of a register of warrants received entry for her, and then we've also got entries for her in the admission, discharge and after career register. It gives us parents' names, so yay for that. Committed in 1908. She was only there for a few months, and we've got the records that we can use to go and find those entries. So here, this is the register of warrants received, and here's Ruth Ruby Hammond up the top there. So she's uncontrollable and associated with low class of young men. Oh dear. Fairly good education, Church of England, parents' names, and some background to the family there as well. The Mittagong Farm Home for Boys opened in 1905, and they sent, when the Sobraon closed, they sent the Sobraon boys there as well in 1911. It was an industrial school and opened as a probationary training home for boys aged 8 to 17, those boys convicted in the children's courts. So we've got a register of committals from 1907. You get the name, the age, date of committal, what their offence was, parents' details, character of parents and home surroundings, any maintenance orders and remarks. And as I said, when the Sobraon closed, they sent those boys up there, and there's a list of those included, and that's also on our index on our website. And here's a copy of the Register of Committals. So it's very much, again, that one-line entry idea where you've got the child's name, their age, so he's 14. So a lot of these kids are sort of, well, 8, but there's quite a few teenagers there. Date they were committed, what they were, so uncontrollable, running away from home, and then eventually Claude here was released to his father on probation after a little while. Excellent parents, so they always say it's not always the parents' fault. Sometimes, but sometimes not so much. Sometimes circumstances, sometimes just the child, sometimes just everything. Who knows? Another source of information are the dependent children's registers. These cover 1883 to 1923. These are records of children who were admitted to state care. So remember we were talking about they moved from the barrack style of accommodation to more of a fostering out kind of system. So these were records when children were placed with foster families or guardians. So it's more that boarding out kind of idea, boarding into a family rather than boarding into a large institution. Some of these kids were eventually adopted. We've got the registers covering the years 1883 to 1923. They're available on microfilm in our reading room and also at the State Library, and included in the index, in the microfiche, are the indexes to the records, and these are not included in the online childcare and protection index, although it would be fantastic one day if they were. So this is an example of an entry from the Dependent Children's Register. Lily Brabham, she's 7, born in 1902, admitted 1910, Presbyterian, talks about the parents. So she's got a stepfather and a stepmother in Balmain. She's neglected, and then you get details of who she was boarded out to, and then details of any payments that were made for her maintenance. And she's discharged to her stepfather in Marrickville in 1915. So she's in care for quite a while, for 5 years there. And this next example here, we've got William James Devine, details about his parents there. So father was William James Murray, living near Louth, and his mother is Edith Devine. And then we've got details of all the different people that he's boarded out to. And then we've got details of payments and things that were made there down the bottom as well. And this is an example from the records that take over from the Dependent Children's Registers. These are called boarding out registers or ward registers, and these cover the years 1923 to 1936. And we can see here that Henry Owen Aiken, details of his parents, John and Elizabeth Aikens at Marylands. So he's boarded out to his auntie and his grandmother before he's discharged in 1933 to his grandmother. So he's a teenager by that stage. Just a quick mention about 20th century youth migration. So there were a number of schemes that involved school-aged children coming from the United Kingdom. Some of these are probably familiar to you as terms or in more detail. So there was the Dreadnought scheme from 1911. Barnardo's brought a lot of kids out after 1923. The Big Brother movement from 1925, and then Fairbridge Farm. A lot of children went to Fairbridge Farm from 1937 and onwards. This kind of migration ceased in 1967. We have a guide on our website to the records that we hold in our collection to do with this concept. but you do find that many records are in the National Archives of Australia's collection, including passenger lists of children coming overseas. This is an example from the Dreadnought Register. It's called the Contribution Register, and it was a register of money paid to the Department of Industrial Relations. So thinking about that notion of bringing older boys out to work and learn how to work on farms and that kind of thing, and money's paid out on account of the Dreadnought immigrants. So it's one way to track down some of your Dreadnought immigrants. Just noting the very limited time period of this register from 1922 to 1924. Fairbridge Farm, we do have quite a few records, and these are listed in our online schools index. So go to online indexes, S for school, schools, type in the name of the schools, and we've just done a webinar on schools not that long ago, so you can look at that one for lots of information about schools. But I think more to the point for today is that we've got things like the admission register for Fairbridge Farm School, we've got punishment books for Fairbridge Farm School, visitors book, equipment registers, program and lesson registers, as well as administrative files that can give you some information about that school and how it ran and what it was like and that sort of thing at the time, as well as the kids who were enrolled at the school. And then we've got another admission register listed there, 1938 to 1963. So admission registers for schools are open after 30 years, but punishment registers are closed for 50 years. Sadly, now 50 years is 1970. So anything earlier than 1970 would be open to public access. Anything 1970 and later, still closed to public access. Now, there are some related records that can be useful if you're looking for children, generally, children in care, children that might have slipped through the cracks, parents who've gone off the rails and possibly what's happened to their kids, or, you know, some kind of tantalising clue as to what's happening. Don't forget probate and divorce records, because there might be references to children in these records. So probate, of course, surviving children, but divorce records, so custody and maintenance, who got the kids, who had to pay for them, all of that kind of thing. You might get some information in a divorce file. Police gazettes. 1856 to 1930. I didn't put the dates on there, my apologies. These are digitised from the microfilm up to 1930 now, and you can search these on Ancestry, which is a boon. It's excellent. The jail records, we have microfilmed and digitised our jail photograph description books prior to 1930. And you can search these through our online indexes, and you can actually view copies of the jail photograph description sheet from 1870 to 1930 on our website. We've got records of mental asylums. So don't forget, a parent may have been admitted to a mental hospital. So like we've seen quite a few actually through the talk when I come to think of it, including my own first Hannah's that ended up here. And two, a child might have been admitted to a mental hospital as well. So that did happen too. Often if there was like a congenital problem, sometimes you see them there if they had epilepsy and things. This is an example from the Police Gazette. So we're 1872, and I've just made the entry really big there. So you can see here, Clara Andrews, she's 11. She's wandering on the street. She's got no means of support. She was arrested by the Newcastle police and sent to the industrial school at Biloela, where I guess at least she'd have a roof over her head. And here's another one. So we've got deserting wives and families. So this is another thought too. If the parents or the fathers deserted the family, the impact of that on the child. Here is a child, James Jupp. He was absconding from his indented apprenticeship. He's 15, 4'10", very short for 15 in today's standards, fair hair, complexion, dark suit, and a black felt hat with a stiff rim. And he was from the Vernon, and he had a light terrier dog with him. So I'm glad he had a dog, and I think that's nice. And then underneath that, we've got Richard Taylor, who's charged with deserting his two children, leaving them without the means of support. And there's further information about him. So we've got his name. We know he was born here. He's a labourer, and his mother keeps a public house in the Billabong. So some interesting information there about the family. Mental hospital records, those other closed doors. So this is the entrance gate to Callan Park Hospital, which is just across the river there from Gladesville. And you might find children or their parents in psychiatric hospitals. So again, there's long closures. So patient identifying records are closed to public access for 110 years, which in 2020, that means 1910 is the cut-off date. So patients who are there before 1910, records open to public access. Patients who are still patients after 1910, even if they were admitted before, records closed to public access. So the procedure there is to contact New South Wales Health. There's a process that you follow to request permission to access the records. You will have to submit either a statement or certificates showing your connection to the patient. They'll consider the application, and then if you get permission, then you contact us. We'll check the records for records relating to that patient, let you know the results of the search, and at that stage you can either come in to view the records, or we can do sometimes copies for a fee, just depending how much there is. So it's only government-run psychiatric hospitals that we hold in the collection. So those would include Parramatta, Gladesville or Tarban Creek, Callan Park, Kenmore, Bloomfield, Newcastle and Rydalmere. I think that's probably the main ones there. I was racking my brains a little bit. And then there's also the asylums. So we're not forgetting all those poor boys that were at Rabbit Island and Pete and Milson Islands. So we hold admission registers for Pete and Milson's Islands 1911 to 70, and the discharge register for that same time period 1911 to 1965. So a lot of the men really did go there as boys, and some of them stayed there nearly their whole lives. These records again are closed to public access for 110 years, which means that they are fully in the closed period. These records are under the control of Family and Community Services. So the contact to request permission to access these records is Communities and Justice, Right to Information and Subpoena Unit. And I've put the telephone number and the email address there. We also have Stockton Hospital, which was more for women and girls. So I don't know if it's true, but when I look at Stockton Hospital admission registers, it's often those women who might have been in an institution for a really long time. They might have been at Kenmore or Parramatta or Gladesville or something, and when their conditions stabilised, they might be sent on to Stockton, and it's kind of like almost retirement. I don't know. Just they sort of seem to just live out their days there. You do see younger girls as well who come in, so they might be sort of mid-late teens, go into their 20s, that kind of thing. And again, the date ranges are 1910 to the 1950s that we hold records for here at State Archives, but it's only registers that we hold. So again, that one-line entry to do with that patient. So usually they're things like their name, their age, their condition in terms of their psychiatric condition, as well as were they married or single, what was their occupation, had they been transferred from anywhere else, where was that, and were they transferred to somewhere else, where was that. So that kind of information, it's really, really basic, but that's what we've got in the collection. What I've got here is an admission register from Newcastle Psychiatric Centre. So this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, where you've just got their name, their gender, their age, social condition, so that's that kind of condition, occupation, nil, nativity, so they're talking there about did they come from here, did they come from overseas, what town did they come from. So there are some English people, then you've got some people from Bathurst, some it just says nil, so they may not know where they lived prior, their religion, cause of insanity, and then what sort of disorder. So you've got to take these records in the context of their time. So this is 1871, and the descriptions are not descriptions, of course, that they'd use now. But, you know, back in 1871, it was a term that was accepted. So you can't really see, but it does say idiot. Some say imbecile. And then you might find that some were epileptic. And Newcastle, I just think, is interesting because there did tend to be a lot of kids who were admitted there. And you can see here from the ages that a lot of young people, yes, some older people as well, but we've got 7, 21, 20, 13, 9, 26, 9, 8, 5, 7. So here we've got Jessie Ma. She's 9. She's single. And she's come from Tarban Creek. So they did run hospital school up at Newcastle Asylum, so there was a lot of setup for the kids. So maybe that's why she was sent there. And then if we go over the page here, we've got the medical casebook for Jessie. And the medical casebooks are usually quite good. They have like an entry on that patient. Here we've just got basic details about her, when she was admitted, and then observations from the doctors as they come around to see her. So 71, 74, she's still there. No change, no change, no change. Sometimes with the hospitals, you'll also get a bit of a paragraph about how, or the circumstances leading up to their admission, so they can sort of help you to understand why and how. That's the end of the talk for today. So I want to thank you all for coming. I hope that it's been useful for you, and thank you very much.